The barn door hung crooked on its hinges, letting in a slice of brutal afternoon sun that cut across the dirt floor like a blade. Dust floated in the light, slow and golden, the kind of peaceful you'd see in a painting, except for the voices. Gideon Cole stood just outside, one boot planted in the dry grass, the other still in the stirrup. He'd been riding fence line for 3 days, checking posts after the storm, and all he wanted was a meal and a bed. But the voices stopped him cold. Not voices, a voice. A child's voice. "I'm too young to be a wife," she said, and the words came out broken, like something cracked clean through the middle. "Please, I'm only 13, I don't know how to be anyone's wife." Gideon's hand froze on the saddle horn. Inside the barn, someone laughed, low and wet, like phlegm in the back of a throat. "You'll learn quick enough, girl. That's what happens when your pa can't pay his debts." Gideon didn't move, didn't breathe. The gelding beneath him shifted, sensing the tension in his rider's body, but Gideon barely noticed. His mind was 3 places at once: the voice inside, the weight of the rifle strapped to his saddle, and the sick, crawling realization that this wasn't the first time he'd heard something like this. It was just the first time he'd been close enough to stop it. He dismounted slow, boots landing soft in the dirt. The barn was set back from the main road, half hidden by a stand of cottonwoods that hadn't been watered in years. The wood was grey and splintered, the roof sagging in the middle. It wasn't a place people stumbled onto by accident. Gideon had stumbled onto it because his fence line ran right past it. He stepped toward the door, one hand resting on the worn leather of his belt, the other hanging loose at his side. The voices inside were clearer now. "13's plenty old enough. My own ma was married at 12. That don't make it right." "Right," the first man laughed again. "Right don't put food on the table, does it? Her pa owes me 6 months, rent on that plot of land. This settles it." "She's a child, Harlan. She's property now, signed and witnessed. You got a problem with that, take it up with the law." Gideon's jaw tightened. He knew that name. Harlan Voss, a land speculator who'd come west after the war, buying up parcels from desperate families and bleeding them dry with interest they'd never be able to pay. Gideon had seen him in town a handful of times, always dressed too fine for a man who worked the dirt, always flanked by men who carried guns like they were born holding them. Gideon pushed the barn door open. The light spilled in, cutting through the shadows, and for a moment everyone inside froze. There were 4 men. Harlan stood in the center, his coat dusty but expensive, his hat tilted back to show a face that looked like it had been carved from old leather. 2 of his men flanked him, hands resting on their gun belts, eyes narrowed at the sudden intrusion. The 4th man stood off to the side, older, his face lined with worry and shame. That one wasn't Harlan S. And then there was the girl. She sat on the ground near the back wall, her knees pulled up to her chest, her arms wrapped tight around them. Her dress was plain, faded blue cotton, torn at the hem. Her hair hung loose around her face, dark and tangled, and her eyes, God, her eyes, were red and swollen from crying. She didn't look up when Gideon stepped inside. She just stared at the dirt between her feet, trembling. "Who the hell are you?" Harlan's voice was sharp, irritated, like Gideon had interrupted something mundane. "A card game, a business deal." Gideon didn't answer right away. He let the door swing shut behind him, the latch clicking softly. The barn smelled like old hay and horse sweat and something else, fear maybe or shame, hard to tell the difference sometimes. "I'm the man who heard a child crying," Gideon said finally. His voice was low, steady, the kind of tone that didn't rise or fall. "And I'm wondering what kind of men stand around listening to that without feeling sick." One of Harlan's men took a step forward, his hand moving toward his gun, but Harlan raised a hand to stop him. "This is a private matter," Harlan said, his tone smooth now, like he was explaining something to a simpleton. "Family business, nothing to concern yourself with." "That girl doesn't look like family. She's contracted. Her father signed the papers this morning, all legal." Gideon's eyes flicked to the older man standing off to the side. The man's face was pale, his hands shaking. he wouldn't meet Gideon's gaze. "That true?" Gideon asked. The man opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just nodded barely, like even that small movement cost him something. Gideon looked back at Harlan. "Let me see the papers." Harlan's smile was thin and cold. "I don't have to show you a damn thing." "Then I'll assume they don't exist." "You calling me a liar?" "I'm calling this what I T is." Gideon's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. "You're trying to buy a child, and I'm standing here telling you that's not happening." Harlan's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went dead. "You don't know what you're stepping into, friend. This land, this deal, it's got nothing to do with you. Walk away while you still can." Gideon didn't move. The girl finally looked up. Her eyes found Gideon's, wide and desperate, and for just a moment he saw something flicker there, hope, maybe, or disbelief, like she couldn't quite believe someone had actually stopped. "Please," she whispered, and the word was so quiet it almost disappeared into the dust. "Please don't let him take me." Gideon's chest tightened. He'd heard that tone before, a long time ago, in another barn, in another county, when he'd been too young and too scared to do anything but watch. "Not this time." "Get up," Gideon said to the girl, his voice gentler now. "Come stand behind me." She didn't move at first. Her eyes darted to her father, to Harlan, back to Gideon. Then slowly she unfolded herself from the ground, her legs shaking as she stood. She took one step, then another, until she was close enough to Gideon that he could hear her breathing, fast and shallow, like a cornered animal. Harlan's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be the first time." One of Harlan's men moved again, and this time Harlan didn't stop him. The man's hand dropped to his gun, fingers curling around the grip. Gideon's hand moved too, faster, resting on the worn leather at his hip. He didn't draw, didn't need to. The movement was enough. The barn went silent. Harlan studied Gideon for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing over his options. Then he smiled again, slow and ugly. "I'll remember you," Harlan said. "I'm not hard to find." Harlan tipped his hat, mockingly polite, and turned toward the door. His men followed, boots heavy on the dirt floor. The older man, the girl's father, lingered for a moment, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something, but no words came. He just turned and walked out after them. The door swung shut. Gideon stood there, listening to the sound of horses moving off, hoofbeats fading into the distance. The girl was still behind him, trembling so hard he could feel it in the air. When he finally turned to look at her, she was staring at him with those red, swollen eyes, her face pale and streaked with dust and tears. "What's your name?" Gideon asked. She hesitated, like even that question was dangerous. "Eliza," she said finally, "Eliza Brennan." "Eliza," Gideon nodded. "You got somewhere safe to go." She shook her head, slow and small. Gideon exhaled through his nose, the weight of the moment settling over him like a heavy coat. He didn't know what he was stepping into. Didn't know what kind of trouble Harlan Voss would bring down on his head for this. But when he looked at Eliza Brennan, 13 years old, trembling, too young to be sold like cattle, he knew he couldn't walk away. "Not again." "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you out of here." Gideon's ranch sat 5 miles north, tucked into a shallow valley where the grass still grew thick in the spring and the creek ran year-round. It wasn't much, a cabin, a barn, a corral for the horses, but it was his, bought with money he'd saved working trail drives and cattle sales after the war. He'd built most of it himself, one plank at a time, and it showed. The cabin leaned slightly to the east, and the barn door still didn't close all the way, but it was solid. It was home. Eliza didn't say a word the entire ride. She sat in front of Gideon on the saddle, her hands clutching the horn, her body stiff and silent. Gideon didn't push her. He just kept the horse at a steady walk, letting the rhythm of the ride do the talking. When they reached the cabin, he dismounted first, then helped her down. She stumbled a little when her feet hit the ground, like her legs had forgotten how to hold her weight. "You hungry?" Gideon asked. She nodded, barely. All right, go on inside. I'll see what I've got. She hesitated at the door, glancing back at him like she was waiting for permission, or maybe waiting to see if he'd change his mind. Gideon just nodded toward the cabin, and after a moment, she went inside. Gideon stood there for a moment longer, staring at the closed door. Then he turned and walked to the well, drawing up a bucket of water. He splashed some on his face, scrubbing the dust and sweat away, trying to scrub away the sick feeling in his gut while he was at it. It didn't work. Inside, he found Eliza sitting at the small wooden table, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked even smaller in here, surrounded by the rough-hewn walls and the faint smell of wood smoke. Gideon moved to the stove, checking the pot of beans he'd left simmering that morning. Still warm. He ladled some into a bowl, added a piece of cornbread, and set it in front of her. "Eat," he said. She stared at the bowl like she wasn't sure it was real. Then, slowly, she picked up the spoon and took a bite, then another, and another. She ate like she hadn't seen food in days, and maybe she hadn't. Gideon didn't ask. He poured himself some coffee and sat down across from her, letting the silence stretch. After a while, she set the spoon down and looked up at him. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Gideon took a sip of his coffee, buying himself a moment. Because it was the right thing to do. Most people don't care what's right. Maybe not. My pa didn't. Gideon didn't respond to that. He just watched her, waiting. "He sold me," she said, and her voice cracked on the words. "He said it was the only way to keep the land, that Harlan would take everything if he didn't." She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together. "I begged him. I told him I'd work. I'd do anything. But he said it was already done." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Where's your ma?" "Dead 2 years ago, fever." "Any other family?" She shook her head. Gideon set his coffee down, leaning back in his chair. He didn't know what to say. He'd seen this before, families torn apart by debt, by desperation, by men like Harlan Voss, who made fortunes off other people's suffering. But knowing it didn't make it easier to swallow. "You're safe here," he said finally. "Harlan doesn't know where I live, and even if he did, he's not getting near you." Eliza looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something, truth, maybe, or a reason to believe him. "You don't owe me anything," she said quietly. "You don't even know me." "Doesn't matter." "Then why?" Gideon hesitated. He didn't talk about the past, didn't talk about the things he'd seen, the things he'd failed to do. But something about the way she looked at him, like she was asking for more than just words, made him open his mouth. "I knew a girl once," he said slowly, "about your age. Her name was Clara." Eliza went still. This was back in Missouri before the war. Her family had a farm next to ours, good people. Her pa was a friend of my pa's. Gideon's voice was steady, but his hands tightened around the coffee cup. "After the war, things got bad. A lot of men came back with nothing. Some of them got desperate. Some of them got mean." He paused, the memory pulling at him like a weight. "One of them was a man named Voss. Different first name, but same last name as Harlan, Jasper Voss. He was Harlan's uncle." Eliza's eyes widened. "Jasper bought up land all over the county, same as Harlan's doing now. He offered Clara's pa a loan to keep the farm going. High interest, but Clara's pa didn't have a choice. When he couldn't pay it back, Jasper came to collect." Gideon's voice dropped, almost to a whisper. "He took Clara." Eliza's breath hitched. "I was there," Gideon said. "I was 17. I heard her screaming from the barn. I heard her pa begging. And I stood there frozen because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I'd make it worse. I didn't know if—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I did nothing," he said, "and by the time I worked up the nerve to go inside, they were gone. Clara's pa shot himself 2 days later, and Clara," he shook his head, "I never saw her again." The cabin was silent. Eliza stared at him, her face pale. You think Harlan's doing the same thing his uncle did?" "I know he is." "And you think saving me will make up for not saving her?" Gideon met her eyes. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm not standing by again." Eliza's expression shifted, anger, disbelief, something rawer than either. "You don't get to use me to fix your guilt," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't get to." "I'm not," Gideon said firmly. "This isn't about me, Eliza. This is about you. You deserve better than what your pa tried to sell you into, and I'm going to make sure you get it." She stared at him for a long moment, her jaw tight, her eyes wet with unshed tears. Then, finally, she looked away. "I don't forgive you," she said quietly, "for Clara, for doing nothing. I don't expect you to." "Good." Gideon nodded. He didn't say anything else. He just stood, taking her empty bowl to the basin, and let the silence settle between them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. And somewhere in the distance, hoofbeats echoed through the valley. They came at dawn. Gideon woke to the sound of horses, too many of them, moving slow and deliberate. He was on his feet before his eyes were fully open, pulling on his boots and grabbing the rifle from above the door. Through the window, he could see shapes moving through the early light, dust rising in their wake. 6 men, maybe 7. Harlan Voss rode at the front. Gideon moved to the back room where Eliza was sleeping, shaking her shoulder gently. She woke with a gasp, her eyes wide and terrified. "They're here," Gideon said quietly. Her face went pale. "Harlan and his men, stay in this room. Don't come out unless I tell you to." "What are you going to do?" "Talk first, shoot second." "Gideon, stay here." He didn't wait for her to argue. He stepped out of the cabin, rifle in hand, and stood on the porch as the riders approached. Harlan dismounted first, his boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Cole." "Voss, you know why I'm here?" "I can guess." Harlan gestured to the cabin behind Gideon. "The girl, you took something that doesn't belong to you. She doesn't belong to anyone. The law says different. I've got a signed contract, witnessed, legal." "Legal doesn't mean right." Harlan's smile faded. "You're starting to annoy me, Cole." "Good." One of Harlan's men shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his gun. Gideon's eyes flicked to him, then back to Harlan. "You bring the sheriff with you?" Gideon asked. "Don't need him. This is a private matter." "Then you don't have a leg to stand on." Harlan's jaw tightened. "I'm giving you one chance to make this easy. Bring the girl out, walk away, no one gets hurt." "And if I do?" Harlan didn't answer. He just stared at Gideon, his expression cold and flat. Gideon tightened his grip on the rifle. "You know who your uncle was, Harlan?" Harlan's eyes narrowed. "What?" "Jasper Voss, that was your uncle, wasn't it?" "What the hell does that have to do with anything?" "He did the same thing you're doing now, bought up land, preyed on desperate families, took a girl named Clara Brennan when her pa couldn't pay his debts." Harlan went still. "I was there," Gideon said. "I heard her scream, I did nothing, and I've regretted it every day since." Harlan's face twisted. "That's ancient history." "Not to me. My uncle's dead, has been for 10 years. I know, someone shot him in a saloon in Kansas City. Papers said it was self-defense." "It was." "Was it?" Gideon's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Or was it someone who decided they'd had enough?" Harlan's hand moved toward his gun, but one of his men grabbed his arm, stopping him. "Boss, not yet." Harlan shook him off, his eyes locked on Gideon. "You're out of your depth, Cole. You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A man who thinks money and paper give him the right to own people. That girl's father signed. Her father's a coward. That doesn't make the contract right." Harlan took a step forward. "You think you're some kind of hero. You think this ends well for you. I think I'm not letting you take her." The air between them went taut, stretched thin like a wire about to snap. The men behind Harlan shifted. hands resting on their guns, eyes watching Gideon for any sign of movement. And then a voice came from behind Gideon. "He's not alone." Gideon turned, his heart sinking. Eliza stood in the doorway, her face pale but set, a kitchen knife clutched in her hand. "Eliza, get inside." "No," she stepped forward, her voice trembling but steady. "I'm not hiding anymore." Harlan's smile returned, slow and ugly. "There she is." "I'm not going with you," Eliza said. "I don't care what my father signed. I don't care what the law says. You can't make me." "Actually," Harlan said, pulling a folded paper from his coat, "I can." He held it up, the ink dark and fresh. Gideon could see the signatures at the bottom, Eliza's father's name, shaky and uneven, and Harlan's, bold and confident. "This is a binding contract," Harlan said, "recognized by the territorial courts. You're mine, girl, whether you like it or not." Eliza's grip on the knife tightened. "Then you'll have to drag me." Harlan's expression darkened. He took another step forward, and Gideon raised the rifle. "Don't," Gideon said. Harlan stopped, his eyes flicking to the rifle, then back to Gideon's face. "You gonna shoot me, Cole, in front of all these witnesses?" "If I have to." "You'd hang." "Maybe, but you'd be dead." The standoff stretched, the tension thick enough to choke on. Gideon could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, could see the calculations running behind Harlan's eyes. And then, from the road, another voice called out. "Harlan Voss." Everyone turned. A rider approached, moving fast, dust kicking up behind him. He pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of Gideon's property, dismounting quickly. It was Sheriff Dalton. Gideon's stomach sank. Dalton was a tall man, lean and weathered, with a badge pinned to his vest and a reputation for enforcing the law exactly as it was written, no more, no less. He'd sided with land speculators before. He'd sided with men like Harlan. "Sheriff," Harlan said, his smile returning, "glad you could make it. I've got a situation here. This man's harboring property that belongs to me." Dalton looked at Gideon, then at Eliza, then back at Harlan. His expression was unreadable. "That true, Cole?" Dalton asked. Gideon did lower the rifle. "Depends on how you define property." Dalton's eyes narrowed. "Don't play word games with me. She's 13 years old. Her father sold her to settle a debt. You tell me if that's legal." Dalton was silent for a long moment, then he looked at Harlan. "Let me see the contract." Harlan handed it over, still smiling. Dalton read it slowly, his face giving nothing away. When he finished, he folded it and handed it back. "It's legal," he said. Gideon's chest tightened. "But," Dalton continued, his voice hard, "it's also the most cowardly damn thing I've seen in 20 years of wearing this badge." Harlan's smile faltered. Dalton looked at Eliza. "Girl, you want to go with this man?" "No," Eliza said, her voice breaking. "Please, no." Dalton nodded, then he looked at Harlan. "Get off this property." "What?" "You heard me, get off." "Sheriff, that contract is worth the paper it's printed on and not a damn thing more. I don't care what some judge says, I'm not enforcing it." Harlan's face went red. "You can't." "I just did. Now move before I arrest you for trespassing." Harlan stared at Dalton, his jaw working, his hands clenched into fists. Then slowly he turned and mounted his horse. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and venomous. "Yes," Dalton said, "it is." Harlan rode off, his men following, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Gideon lowered the rifle, his hands shaking. Dalton looked at him. "You just made yourself an enemy, Cole." "I know. Hope it was worth it." Gideon glanced back at Eliza, standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "It was," he said. The days that followed were quiet. Eliza stayed in the cabin, sleeping in the back room, waking late and moving through the space like a ghost. She didn't talk much. Gideon didn't push her. He just kept the fire going, made sure there was food on the table, and gave her space to breathe. On the third day, she came outside. Gideon was mending a section of fence near the corral when he saw her standing on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes fixed on the horizon. He straightened, wiping the sweat from his forehead, and walked over. "You all right?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She just stared out at the valley, at the wide stretch of grass and sky. "I keep thinking he's going to come back," she said finally. "Harlan." She nodded. "He won't, not with Dalton watching." "But what if?" "He won't," Gideon said firmly, "and if he does, I'll be here." She looked at him then, her eyes searching his face. "Why are you doing this?" "I told you." "No, I mean really, why do you care?" Gideon hesitated. He didn't have a good answer, or maybe he did, but it was buried too deep to put into words. "Because no one should have to go through what you went through," he said finally, "and because I couldn't live with myself if I let it happen again." Eliza's expression softened just a little. "You really cared about her, didn't you, Clara?" "I did." "Did you love her?" Gideon paused. "I don't know, maybe. I was too young to understand what that meant." "Do you think she's still alive?" "I don't know that either." Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm not her." "I know. You can't fix what happened to her by saving me." "I'm not trying to." "Then what are you trying to do?" Gideon met her eyes. "I'm trying to do the right thing, that's all." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said. Gideon turned back to the fence, picking up his tools. After a moment, Eliza stepped off the porch and walked over to where he was working. "Can I help?" she asked. Gideon glanced at her, surprised. "You don't have to." "I know, but I want to." He handed her a pair of pliers. "All right, hold this post steady while I tie the wire." They worked in silence for a while, the sun warm on their backs, the smell of grass and earth all around them. It was simple work, repetitive and grounding, and Gideon found himself relaxing for the first time in days. "You're good at this," Eliza said after a while. "Had a lot of practice." "Did you build all of this yourself?" "Most of it." She looked around, taking in the cabin, the barn, the corral. "It's nice. It's home. Do you ever get lonely?" Gideon paused, the question catching him off guard. "Sometimes." "Me too." They finished the fence as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley. When they were done, Eliza stood back, hands on her hips, surveying their work. "Looks good," she said. "It does." She turned to him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Thank you." "For what?" "For this, for everything." Gideon nodded. "You're welcome." They walked back to the cabin together, the air cooling as the light faded. Inside, Gideon started a fire while Eliza set the table. They ate quietly, the silence between them no longer heavy but comfortable. After dinner, Eliza sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Gideon cleaned the dishes, then joined her, settling into the chair across from her. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Do you think my pa will come looking for me?" Gideon considered the question. "I don't know, maybe." "And if he does?" "Then we'll deal with it." "I don't think I can forgive him," she said quietly, "for what he did." "You don't have to." "But he's still my pa." "That doesn't mean you owe him anything." She looked at him, her eyes wet. I wish he'd chosen me just once." Gideon's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say to that. So he just sat there, letting her cry, letting the fire crackle between them. After a while, she wiped her eyes and looked up at him. "You're a good man, Gideon Cole." "I'm just a man." "That's enough." The trouble came 2 weeks later. Gideon was in the barn when he heard the horses. This time, he didn't wait. He grabbed the rifle and stepped outside, his eyes scanning the valley. 3 riders, not Harlan's men. It was Eliza's father. He rode at the front, flanked by 2 men Gideon didn't recognize. They stopped at the edge of the property, and Eliza's father dismounted slowly, his face pale and drawn. "I'm here for my daughter," he said. Gideon didn't move. "She doesn't want to see you." "She's my daughter. I have a right." "You gave up that right when you sold her." The older man flinched, but he didn't back down. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Behind Gideon, the cabin door opened. Eliza stepped out, her face hard. "Pa," she said. Her father turned, his eyes filling with tears. "Eliza, I don't want to hear it. Please, just listen." "No," her voice was firm, steady. "You made your choice, and I'm making mine. I came to bring you home." "I don't have a home, not with you." Her father's face crumpled. "Eliza, please, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't change what you did." He took a step toward her, but Gideon moved between them. "She said no," Gideon said quietly. Her father stared at him, his eyes desperate. "You can't keep her from me." "I'm not keeping her from anything. She's making her own choice." "She's 13. And old enough to know when someone's betrayed her." The 2 men behind her father shifted uncomfortably. One of them cleared his throat. "We should go." Her father ignored them. He looked past Gideon, his eyes fixed on Eliza. "I love you," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I hurt you, but I love you." Eliza's expression didn't change. "Love isn't enough, Pa." He stood there for a long moment, his shoulders sagging. Then, slowly, he turned and climbed back onto his horse. "If you ever change your mind," he said, "you know where to find me." Eliza didn't respond. She just watched as he rode away, the 2 men following. When they were gone, she turned and went back inside. Gideon stood there for a moment longer, staring at the dust they'd left behind. Then he followed her inside. She was sitting at the table, her hands folded in her lap, her face blank. "You all right?" Gideon asked. "I don't know." He sat down across from her. "You did the right thing." "Did I?" "Yes." She looked at him, her eyes wet. "Then why does it hurt so much?" "Because it's supposed to." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What happens now?" "Now," Gideon said, "we figure it out, one day at a time." She nodded slowly. "Okay." The weeks turned into months. Eliza stayed. She helped with the ranch, learning how to mend fences and tend the horses. She started smiling again, slowly, tentatively. She started to feel safe. Gideon taught her to read, sitting by the fire in the evenings, sounding out words from the few books he owned. She was a fast learner, hungry for knowledge, for a future that was hers. One day, Sheriff Dalton rode out to check on them. He dismounted, tipping his hat to Eliza, who was hanging laundry on the line. "She looks good," Dalton said to Gideon. "She's doing well." Harlan Voss left the territory, moved on to Kansas. Gideon felt a weight lift from his chest. Good. Word got around about what he tried to do. People didn't take kindly to it, figured it was safer for him to leave. Gideon nodded. "Thank you for what you did." Dalton shrugged. "I just did my job." "Not many would have." "Maybe, but some things are worth standing for." Dalton rode off, and Gideon stood there, watching the dust settle. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Eliza came and stood beside him on the porch. "You think I'll ever see my pa again?" she asked. "I don't know, maybe." "Do you think I should?" "That's up to you." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I'm glad I'm here with you." Gideon smiled. "I'm glad you're here too." They stood there together, watching the valley turn gold in the fading light. And for the first time in a long time, Gideon felt something like peace. Years later, people would talk about the rancher who took in a girl no one else would protect. They'd talk about the stand he made, choice he didn't have to make, but made anyway. And Eliza would grow up strong, shaped by the hands that built fences and the man who taught her that love wasn't just words, it was action. It was standing when others walked away. It was choosing right, even when it cost you everything. She would carry that lesson with her for the rest of her life. And Gideon would carry her gratitude, a quiet, steady grace that filled the spaces where guilt and regret used to live. The wind moved through the valley, soft and endless, and the sun sank low, painting the world in gold.